We are being filmed again, so I need to say before we start that I need to say that we are being filmed, and if you don't want to be filmed, then leave the room now. And these films will be uploaded, or may be uploaded, onto our website, and therefore become public in that way, and they may be used for training purposes. So if anyone needs to leave, now is the moment to go. Thank you very much. Apologies. We've had apologies from. Actually, I'm not sure if it's apologies or a late arrival. David Hartley.
Yeah, Dave's currently inspecting some of our probationers. I'm working with the probationers and training school.
Okay, so he may be along a bit later.
Yeah.
Okay. We did have apologies from Tim Ford, but he's brought his own apologies with him now, so you're not apologising, you're here. Lauren Holdney sends apologies. Any other apologies?
Carrie's not there.
And Carrie Goodwin sends apologies. We have the press present, we have members of the public present as well, and we have Alan, I think you may be here as an observer from the Police and Crime Panel, and a member of the public. So, an independent member of the Police and Crime Panel, Alan Carter. You're all very welcome. Public questions, announcements, item 2. One announcement, I think, and that is, you may have seen in the press that former interim Chief Constable here at South Yorkshire, Dave Jones, Chief Constable of North Yorkshire, has announced that he's retiring. I think he may even have retired. Was it with instant immediate effect? So we wish him well, and we thank him for the contribution he made when he was briefly here as interim Chief Constable. I think we ought to minute that. Public questions. We do have a public question from Wendy Zealand, who is here. I don't really want to read the question. Wendy, do you want to read it? Or?
No, I'd rather you do, because I've got it in front of me.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. Have people got it around the table? Or?
No.
I haven't. I'll just read the question. And this is from Wendy. May I ask if there will be a period of time when the command team might look at how well things are working at each station since the withdrawal of inspector numbers and the boundaries became larger? So,
okay. Well, thank you. I think 2 parts to the question. In terms of a review of the reintroduction of neighbourhood policing, that is ongoing. It is very much part and parcel of the implementation of the project. There is a very clear expectation that all of our organisational change will be subject to a review of the performance of the function against benefits realisation, which has been very much set forth. We govern that through our sort of change board, which I chair personally, and we will certainly have a comprehensive review of a comprehensive evaluation of the neighbourhood policing function towards the back end of this year. Insofar as the withdrawal of inspector numbers and boundaries, it's true to say that, of course, we have redrawn some of the boundaries to create the new neighbourhood policing teams. These are very much based upon our analysis of need and the like, so that the teams properly reflect our understanding of what is happening on the ground. But insofar as the numbers are concerned, I'm afraid the question is rather based on a false premise, in that we have not withdrawn inspector numbers. In fact, there were 13, there are now 14, so actually a subtle increase. But of course, significantly over and above the PCSOs who were in local areas, we've added to them. So in addition to the 14 inspectors, of course, we've added additionally 33 sergeants, 125 police constables. So actually there's a very significant increase in the numbers of people dedicated to neighbourhood policing.
Okay. Wendy, is that all right, or do you want to ask a supplementary?
I'm sorry, but would you mind just repeating the numbers again, because it's a little bit difficult to hear you over here. I'd like to just record it for the whole.
14 inspectors, 33 sergeants, 125 constables, 224 PCSOs, a grand total of 396 people.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. While we're on numbers, I was looking at numbers of police officers, the reduction of numbers of police officers in South Yorkshire as compared with the Met the other day. I think, Chief, you put this into my head, but since 2010, whether you do a full-time equivalent or a head count or whatever measure, we've lost about 500 in South Yorkshire. The Met during that period have lost about 1,000.
Yeah.
I.e., we've lost 15% of our police officer numbers, and the Met about 5%, which is extraordinary when you think of the noise that comes out of London about reduction in police numbers. But there we go. Okay, thank you very much. That was public questions. I don't think there are any urgent items that I know of. I don't think there are any items to be considered in the absence of the public and press. Declarations of interest. No, okay. Minutes of the last meeting, that's pages 1 to 8. Can I assume that what is written there is an accurate reflection of what took place last time? There's just one thing that I wanted to draw attention to on page 3. This is item 10 towards the end. It's the whole question of reporting to PAB by SYP. I think we may still be, a conversation I had with Mark the other day, I think we may still be a little unclear about how we get from police and crime plan to the plan on the page to anything else, to reporting back to here. And I want us to be absolutely sure that we are in fact very clear about that. So I think if we have a meeting between ourselves, Chief Exec and myself, we can sort that, and we'll need to do that. So if we're trying to get that done. I think one of the issues that arose was because I've been talking about mini plans for districts. I think the word plan, we talked about vocabulary, I think the word plan may suggest something different to yourselves from myself. I just mean a summary of what you're all going to do anyway. Fine. Whereas I think plan suggests to you that I'm wanting you to go off and do extra stuff. I don't think that at all. So we just need to sort that out. Okay.
That's helpful.
So the minutes of the last meeting, are all happy with those? Okay, thank you very much. Matters arising then, this is pages 9 and 10. Michelle?
Yes, the first one is discharge. Sorry? That's in relation to the monitoring of savings plan delivery and budget monitoring report, so that can be discharged. 295. That's in relation to ward plans being prepared by Force. They are in a state of being completed and you're getting them through, Alan, so I suggest we discharge those because you will get them when available.
Just on that, Michelle. There's the ward-based mosaic data, which is for each of the wards. That's on the performance console, so that's on the intranet, which is available, and they're really the consolidation of community feedback, crime pattern analysis, some mosaic type data to give each ward a clarity and an understanding of what the issues there, together with some of the demographics around it. They're then taken by the neighbourhood inspectors and aggregated into various neighbourhood plans. So there's several iterations of the neighbourhood plans based on them. They're aggregated up to neighbourhood levels, so the neighbourhood plans will be the composite of several ward plans, but they're actually what we're going to do with that information.
So these are the local authority wards?
No. Sorry, these are our neighbourhood.
Your neighbourhoods?
Plans.
Yeah.
So each ward on the performance console has a document which you can just tap into. It's available, which gives details on crime trends, community concerns, antisocial behaviour issues. It gives some useful data on how the community is made up. So we know that different sections of the community have a different preference for communications. So the idea is that if a neighbourhood inspector understands that the ward is predominantly an age group that may prefer face-to-face meetings, then we expect the engagement plan to reflect that. Yeah. If it's a younger crowd who may prefer social media, then we'd expect strengths around social media. So then the inspectors in their neighbourhood team look at each of the ward plans, aggregate that up into a neighbourhood plan, which will be the reflection of the various communities in them, which is then reflected in those plans.
So it's very comprehensive, and I look forward to reading it. Okay. Michelle, do you want to carry on?
Yep. So the next one, 296, was in relation to smart contact. That's added to the work programme for the June meeting. So I suggest we discharge that from the work programme.
An update on smart contact I can provide, just in terms of where we are. Obviously, we've got an ongoing relationship with supplier, so there is a degree of commercial sensitivity around the update, but
yes.
it's as detailed by ACC Poltney, which we can add onto the minutes just to serve as a matter of record.
Okay, let's keep going.
297 is in relation to operation signature for future meeting updates. So that's on the work programme for June as well. So I suggest we discharge that one. 298 and 299 one on the page FMS. Victims have been discharged. So moving on to 300.
Sorry, Michelle, to break your flow again, but we'll just try. I'm trying to add colour and richness to it. I thought it might be useful. Hopefully not in your language. We talk about things such as FMS force management statement, and they can be quite a nebulous concept. We are currently preparing the draft force management statement. That is the draft force management statement. Those are not individual copies of the force management statement. Each one of those is an appendix or part of the force management statement. And I just thought it useful, and we don't bulk it. I mean, I think it's been a really useful exercise, and we're finding it a good process to go through and capture the data as an iterative process throughout the year. But I do think it is a useful point to visually represent actually the level of detail and work that does go into these on an ongoing basis through the performance team.
Yes, and that's a very substantial body of work reflected there. That is quite something. Okay. But you live with that for a number of years, then?
That's right.
Well, it's an annual.
But you update it, but essentially the basics are in there now.
Yeah.
So the first year is obviously going to be a bit of a slog to get it, and then we'll get feedback from HMIC about what they like in it, what they don't like in it. So it'll be iterative, and obviously we'll try and construct the performance framework so that the data that's required in it is drawn off on an ongoing basis throughout the year. So this year will be quite hard work for the performance team, but they've broken the back of it, as you can see. There's an awful lot of detail there. So once that's signed off by chief officers, we'll be in a position to do it. The aspiration is that a version will be made public. Clearly there's some detail in it which we wouldn't appropriately want to put in the public domain, but we are keen that there is a public version that we can make available. I think the sense is, from speaking to other colleagues in the north of the country, we are probably at the front of the pack in terms of preparation with it.
And Mark, is there an overarching report? Statement, if you like.
Well,
those are the appendices.
Well, each one relates to a key area of investigation for HMIC. So the process that we've gone through now is chief officers need to go through their relevant sections. There is some analysis and conclusions to be drawn on those. From that, we will then draw an overarching executive summary, which will be signed off by the chief, which will really point to key strengths in the report, but also those challenges we identify, and that will form part of an executive summary.
And the deadline is mid-June now.
I'll tell them I've given them a short deadline.
But just wondering when, because I think it's coming through for is it another look?
Well, clearly part of the process will be come to Alan, because what we want to build in is to any comments from the OPCC. So we're just working through a structured programme where the bulk of the data has been done. Chief officers will then add their bits once we're happy with it, and they've done their bit, then we'll consult with the OPCC so that by the time it goes to HMIC in good time, we've got a rounded document.
Have you finished it?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, Michelle.
Action 300 is in relation to the report last time around domestic abuse courts, the hearing date, and there was just an accuracy issue that was put right. So the minutes today reflect that. 301 related to PVP civilian investigators, and we've got that 31st of May, thank you. 302 was in relation to the victims' care strategy. It's added to the work programme for September to be updated with Tim on that. And then the final one is discharge in relation to Aubrey.
Okay, any questions? Okay, we'll move on then to item 9, which is the PAB work programme. Michelle?
I think it's just to say, Alan, that 3 months are provided each time. Just hand over to Erica in relation to whether there is anything to highlight in the next 3 months.
I think, Michelle, we just wanted to draw out there that I think it's in June where there's an expectation for the course to bring forward some information around the efficiency and the effectiveness and value for money element of the police and crime plan. And what we said about that was that we would need to work through what the format might look like. So just to give an early heads up that that's coming in June, and maybe at a future peg we could have a conversation around exactly what does that report look like coming into this board. And then generally I think the point that you made earlier about yourself and Michelle sitting down with the force around reporting generally, we'll pick up the other points that we were going to raise on the work programme.
Okay. So this was on page 12, 1, 2, 3.
It's on page 13.
Page 13.
Sorry, no, page 12.
Page 12, about 5 slots down or something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm confusing you now. Page 13 is the efficiency and effectiveness that I'd like to work with the force in terms of looking what the format would look like. And on page 12, serious and organised crime is the one that's coming in June, that also we probably need an early discussion to agree what that's going to look like.
Is that okay?
Alan, could I ask a question about something on page 11?
Yeah.
3 from the bottom is the review of rape convictions. That presumably is as a result of the disclosure, the problems with disclosure. Is that correct? That's the whole country. All forces, I think, are undertaking a review of rape convictions. Is it not rape and serious sexual assault, or is this shorthand?
I'll need to go back to the action that was from PAB on the 29th of January, and that's where this particular requirement came from. So I think you're right, Andrew, but I need to be absolutely 100% sure and go back and check that.
Yeah. Right. Everybody happy with that? Okay. That was the PAB Works programme. On to item 10 then, which is Erica again, pages 15 to 18.
It's a joint report by Deputy Chief Principal and myself. So I'll hand over to Mark and I'll just introduce what this sets out to do. At the PCC's Planning and Efficiency Group, we had a discussion in relation to where do the force management statements sit alongside the normal planning process for the Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan refresh each year. Because we have a timetable for getting the plan refreshed and the budget set every calendar year. And we needed to understand what's just been described by the force around its force management statements, where it assesses its future demand looking ahead 4 years, I believe, where that sits alongside the timetable. As part of the consultation from HMIC FRS on those force management statements, what was floated was a circular diagram which showed a timetable of what they thought a planning timetable ought to look like. And what we agreed with the Chief Constable was we would have a look at that clock that had at various number points activities that ought to be done during the year to get to a plan refresh and a budget setting exercise, and work out where that clock ought to be turned and start from and end to fit within our normal planning timetable, so we didn't have to disrupt the activity of the PCC's office and the force. So that is what we have sought to do in this report, which is describing what force management statements set out need to be done, and overlaying that with our planning timetable and keeping it as simple as possible. And then, so the diagram at Appendix A is the HMI CFRS's steps, but overlaying some of the detail that we had in our timetable so that it makes sense to us. Just as an example, HMI CFRS had in its planning timetable an assessment of demand in April-May time. We've moved it to June-July. Now, what the force do as part of that assessment is entirely a matter for the force. Mark and I have had conversations around that's not going to be viewed as the strategic intelligence assessment or the operational threat assessment, because that is done later in the year. But what the HMI CFRS were talking about in its original timetable, I believe, was an assessment of demand. So it's entirely a matter for the force. That's all I was proposing to say about it, Alan. It's just an overlay of one on top of the other to try and get us to ensure the statements get done, but the planning timetable gets followed as well.
Is everybody clear and happy?
I mean, there's fixed points
Yeah.
that we've each got to hit. So in terms of budget requirements, your planning requirements, us FMS, so they're kind of the fixed anchors on the clock, and the various other elements are fitted in between. So.
And just only for want of a better opportunity to shoehorn a bit of good news into the meeting around the assessment of demand, you will know that one of the things that underpinned HMIC's assessment in 2016 that we required improvement around efficiency was that we were felt then to be incapable, frankly, of describing adequately the demand faced by the force. And a cause of concern was raised by HMIC back then, notwithstanding the fact that HMIC won't be coming back to do a formal re-inspection until the new year. We were notified late last week that that cause for concern has been officially lifted. So HMIC have acknowledged some of the really good detailed work that's been going on around the assessment and understanding of demand, and that's a good news in and of itself, but of course it's really important because that detailed understanding of demand becomes the grist to the problem-solving mill, which is the very point of reintroducing neighbourhood policing. So some really good news in that.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Any other comments? Okay, no. Thank you very much. Item 11 then, police and crime reporting arrangements. Michelle, is this you again?
Yeah, just a very brief report, Commissioner. It follows on from last month's PAB, where we saw the two delivery plans, one from the force, one from the OPCC, about how the plan's outcomes were going to be achieved through activities, and then this just describes how they will come together in terms of reporting arrangements for assessing progress against the plan. There will be a quarterly report from the OPCC that will bring together inputs from the force and from the OPCC, essentially, put those together to provide you a picture on whether your plan has been achieved or not each quarter. So that's the setup. I wasn't going to dwell any more on that. The paper should speak for itself.
There is a reference in 3.2 to mini plans. I think that language is probably not helpful, and we should drop the word mini plan and call them something else. District summaries, I think, may be a better way of describing it, because they're not plans in the sense that we're asking you to go off and do stuff. It's me trying to capture what's going on in those districts as I go around talking to parish councils, town councils, and the like. So it's not a burden that I'm trying to place on the force. Quite the opposite. It's reflecting in the bits of paper I take to those particular districts. What's in the police and crime plan, and what are the particular issues that are facing people in Barnsley or Rotherham or Doncaster or Sheffield.
And I think that's very helpful in the sense that I think you're right. I think the word plans rather sort of brings a connotation that's probably not intended. The fact that you might rightly seek to highlight a series of issues that are perhaps germane to one district and not to another seems a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and we will demonstrate our ability to respond to that, and certainly part of the DEP's holding to account arrangements in force are precisely to bring district commanders to a place where they are specifically addressing those issues in addition to the general corporate thrust. So I think that's helpful.
Well, I notice most of what appears in the summaries is it's general, it's across the
Yes.
piece,
Yeah.
but occasionally you get something that is specific to Doncaster, or rather
Absolutely.
or whatever. So
Absolutely.
that's-
Yep.
Thank you very much. Item 12 then, performance against the police and crime plan. I think it's probably true to say that the report that we've got reflects the old arrangements that we used to have, and we've kind of tried to pretend almost that they are meeting the new arrangements by changing the title of it. But actually it's a report under the old regime, isn't it? And we're going to get the new regime right, because it'll be different. We'll be reporting against those themes that are there in the new police and crime plan going forward. But is this you, Mark, who's going
Yes,
to say a
yeah.
word to this? And then...
I think you're right, just to frame it in that way, but I mean there is a good degree of synergy from your old plan to the new plan, so it's not changed fundamentally, but it's just in
Crime is
nuance.
crime.
Yes.
So in terms of the bits we've highlighted, obviously the report's there as a matter of record, but just some points to particularly highlight. We had the HMIC FRS effectiveness inspection, which is obviously good news in terms of our rating now being as good. Some of the highlights which were relevant to last year's police and crime plan in particular was that the force was recognised for its clear vision for crime prevention as part of its neighbourhood policing and focusing on problem solving and early partnership based interventions, which I think chime with both last year's iteration of your plan and this year's iteration. There was positives that the crime investigations contain clear investigation plans that were regularly reviewed, which is a real positive, and I think again it highlighted the positive impact of the Crime Support Hub, which is a central function where crimes are reported to us. We make sure we QA them, put in an appropriate level of investigation and really give a degree of consistent service. And from the Strategic Change Board yesterday, we are looking to enhance the strength of that department because we think it's proved its worth as a function, so it makes sense to add on to that, which releases capacity on the districts to do more proactive work. One of the points that did come out of HMRC's work, they found that we were effective at identifying vulnerable people and that we gave a good service where people were identified as being risk or particularly vulnerable. The report did focus on the fact that in terms of our ability to resource some of the not as acute vulnerability, but those victims who are presenting or were initially at a lower risk, we do have a challenge that we need to meet in terms of meeting that demand. But I think the positive was that we are effectively applying a process. As you would expect, we apply those resources to those at the most greatest need and those particularly vulnerable, but there is a triage process that works through. But we are acutely aware that we need to make sure that the service is as good as it possibly can be for everyone who comes to us. There's an ongoing focus in the force around burglary response. We are striving to enhance our response. Some interesting feedback came from HMIC when they attended one of our performance meetings, and we were having a good debate around the resource that should actually go to a burglary, whether it should be a dedicated investigative resource or response, and it was a good healthy debate with different views on all sides. And you wonder how these things will play out with the inspectorate there and us in effect going through our workings out in front of them. The feedback we got from them is that they were really heartened that we're having a debate about what's the appropriate level of resource to go to a burglary. Other forces under their demand pressure have taken the decision that they don't go to burglaries, and others have come up with different ways, some of which have been mischaracterised in the media about what they do and don't go to. So actually we got the good feedback that they were heartened that we're giving some proper thought to how we actually give a service to the public. So that was
Just pausing on that, so there's a sort of triaging that goes on then. Is that how a burglary is? How you deal with
Yeah,
it?
in terms of burglary, one of the things that was subject to debate, there had been a practice where burglaries were delayed so that a detective could go to them. Now that can be the right thing, but it can be the wrong thing if there's an inordinate direct delay in terms of quality of service to the member of the public, but also our evidential opportunities. The longer you wait, the less chance you've got of detecting it. So that was the focus of that debate, where my initial standpoint is the first resource available goes. If there's a requirement for a specialist and that specialist can go within a reasonable time frame, then of course local supervision have the mandate to actually determine who goes.
But you wouldn't necessarily go to all burglaries,
No,
so a decision has to be made there.
but it's a decision based on an assessment of the scene and the positive lines of inquiry, not. It's reported that some forces have taken a view that we can't afford to go to burglaries. That's not our position. We will apply the right resource, and burglary is a really significant crime. Beyond those crimes where some physical harm's caused to someone, it's probably the most serious crime a member of the public suffers. So it's still very much a priority
I think
for
that's
us.
the bit the public find most difficult is when it's done over the telephone and nobody
Yes.
calls. I think they do find that.
And I think certainly in the case of residential burglary, because there's different types of burglary, of course, sometimes people have a shed at the bottom of the garden broken into. That's also a burglary. That's clearly of a different order. In terms of residential burglary, where there are people in the home, as opposed to it being a vacant or empty house, or a derelict house, for example, residential burglaries, there's a very, very small minority that we wouldn't actually physically go to because of the significance of the crime. So we are absolutely focused on burglary as an important crime, and we will deal with them all appropriately, but they'll all be thoroughly investigated.
There is a caveat on just an explanation on what the Chief said there in terms of residential burglary, because we probably all understand what residential burglary is. In plain speaking, it's someone's house. Previously, sheds and garages, for example, if not attached to a house, would have been counted as burglary other.
Yeah.
The definition's been revised so that garages and sheds are now counted as residential burglaries.
Yeah.
So just when we look at the figures, it complicates it.
Wait, when did that happen? That was
September last year, something like
very, very recent.
Yeah.
So your residential burglary figures are likely to go up because you're now including sheds and garages.
Whereas they would previously have been burglary other, which have been counted with burglaries to shop premises and business premises.
I think that's very difficult. For the public to
It's
understand.
unhelpful. I mean, suffice to say, people whose homes are burgled, in the sense that we all understand somebody has entered your home unlawfully. In those circumstances, they always carry a very high priority for us. There are lesser forms of burglary, notwithstanding the fact that might be characterised as residential burglary, where it's an adjoining shed to a house or something like that. Still doesn't mean it's insignificant, but it carries a lesser impact on the victim, and we deal with these things appropriately. But the point about being able to come to a really good conclusion as to what appropriate looks like is, I think, being better enacted now through the triaging model that the Dep describes.
So if I were to ask the question, have burglaries gone up in South Yorkshire, or down, or stayed the same? It's complicated by the fact that you're now counting garages and sheds. But if you extract garages and sheds, have burglaries gone up or down? Because the report doesn't tell me that.
Burglaries have been going up over a period of time in South Yorkshire, including what we would understand as residential burglaries. Just before Christmas, around about November, we put considerable focus on districts to reduce that rate of increase. That was successful in capping it, and across the districts there is some variance, but we have seen some reductions, and certainly parts of Sheffield have seen some good reductions.
So that would have been quite helpful to have captured in the report. Yeah. So keep.
Okay. Going on in terms of neighbourhood profiles and problem-orientated policing plans, That really is something that is entwined with our move back to neighbourhood teams. By having the neighbourhood teams, it gives us the opportunity for people to understand their locality, but also be responsible for particular areas. When Scott talks about Barnsley, I think we'll probably pick some more of that out about the positive benefits that's having for us.
Just on that, it's obvious too that some of the local authorities are now talking about problem solving within their districts. So it's all beginning to align, hopefully.
It is.
What the police are doing.
It is, and I think an important element of that is there's some elements that we've developed which I think are really good. Our sort of problem-solving portal, which is the thing that carries all the problem-solving plans, and will be something around which best practice can be disseminated. We recently contracted with a supplier for problem-solving training, which we have now completed, but that problem-solving training was also offered up to local authority partners, people from housing, education and all the rest of it, so they participated in the same training as our people, so these are predominantly folks within neighbourhood policing teams. So there is an outbreak of common language, common acceptance of the sort of terms that we're using, but perhaps more importantly, they're using a common approach to dealing with repeat issues of demand in localities where they are co-located. And the Safer Neighbourhood Service, which sits atop the dedicated local teams, is where that really starts to gain some good bite. And again, I fully anticipate that when Chief Superintendent Green talks to the Barnsley experience, you'll start to demonstrate some practical examples of where that starts to work. And I won't steal his thunder, but I have heard some really good examples of some of the work going on in Barnsley.
Okay. You're having quite a build-up. Expectations are rising. I mean, I think it's very good that the training together, because if we're solving our problems by shifting on to somebody else, that is not a good thing in the public sector. So I think we all need to understand what we're doing.
Yeah. And some of the problems we can't solve.
Yeah, exactly.
We can contribute to, but we do need that partnership buy-in. Strategically, Dave Hartley oversees that prevention and demand reduction group. Next week we're hosting a national evidence-based policing conference, which again I think it really marks a shift in terms of where we are as a force. We're becoming a significant national player, I think, in terms of the problem solving and evidence-based policing approach, which has got to be a good thing.
Yeah. Just taking that and linking it to what we were saying before, does that include thinking about partners and how that works out with partners, the reduction?
Absolutely. It gives us an understanding of where our demand, both in terms of the binary count of how many times we get called, but then the officer effort and where that flows from. And often it flows from linkage where partner agencies are involved in that core service, for example, health, mental health, and vulnerability. But then also we can see where partners can offer in terms of the problem-solving solution. So it really is integral to the whole piece around the problem-solving approach to upstream intervention is very much partnership-based. And I mean, the key focus in the early stages is very much around the hospitals and healthcare, which is, has huge implications for officer effort needed.
Just before we leave that page, Mark, on crime and ASB, the summary, the first paragraph there, the total number of incidents reported in this period was 226,000. It would have been helpful to know what had gone before,
what the trend was,
because otherwise it's meaningless to me. But whether it's up or down, I did take I did actually look, and the last time it was reported on, it was 240,387. So it seems to have gone down, and I wondered therefore whether we understood why.
Well, there's some detail on the next page about the number of ASB incidents. I think what we've seen, and we're very careful about not trumpeting success that we're actually not naturally nailed on. So there has been some good reductions, and Dave and the district commanders can talk to specific examples where we know we've reduced antisocial behaviour or incidents because we've seen an issue, we've applied a plan, and we've seen an effect. There is a point, however, that in terms of the crime recording standards, and we've seen increases in assaults without injury and some public order offences, and there's probably been there has been a transfer of some what would have been antisocial behaviour incidents into lower levels of crime around assault without injury and public order. So yes, we can absolutely attribute some reductions in specific locations to our activity. In terms of some of the broader reductions on ASB, we just need to be slightly careful because that weighs off on some increases in crime.
Yeah, I understand that. And we have some data around that, do we? That what you just described, we have some data around that we can have a look at.
Absolutely.
It'd be interesting to see that. Okay.
I think probably the report speaks for itself, and the rest of it, unless there's any specific points.
Well, it was about crime, and I was just a little bit surprised that there was nothing in here about serious and violent crime, and particularly in the light of the government strategy recently announced. I thought we might have had something along that. I know you did something on knife crime a little while ago, but
if you'd like us to bring it forward on the publication of the government's knife crime, serious violent crime strategy, we have initiated a piece of work in the force to assess what that strategy is and how we correlate to it in terms of our approach and performance.
that'd be good.
So that'd be something we can bring forward.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments?
Just before we move to Scott, apologies, but can I just ask the office for future where we have district commanders arriving, perhaps we'll bring the force performance report up to the top of the agenda so that the district commander can go second and be off. Apologies.
Can I just very briefly before we leave off this report, the very last paragraph talks about the SYP alerts, which is an important thing, and it shows over 5,200 people. And I know that number is growing like Topsy, and I think that number already tops 7,000. So it's almost as soon as we print a number, it's actually out of date, and that's a really significant thing because. We really do want to see that number improve literally if we can achieve it to the hundreds of thousands, because ideally this is how our neighbourhood teams are proactively putting information into the hands of the public, and so far it's been very well received. I received 2 weeks ago my first complaint from a councillor that they were getting too much information from their neighbourhood policing team, and I said that this was a complaint that I was not willing to do anything about, I could, if I could just take the opportunity to encourage anybody who hasn't subscribed to SYP alerts, they should do. It's very easy to do. I've done it myself, and I read also daily about what it is that the neighbourhood policing team are doing in my patch, as I know has been the practice with other chief officers.
Yes, no, I subscribe as well and get that. So they are very good, and yes, you're right. Everywhere we go, people commend the force for
Yes,
that.
yeah.
And if you tell me the name of that council, I'll tick him off. We really can't have that. That's the other side down that. Just for the future, I know we're moving to the new police and crime plan, and it's different way of doing these reports. And Erica's got a document there which you can pass around, which may be helpful to.
Yeah, I shared this with force colleagues a little while ago now. That all I've tried to do is map across the outcomes within the police and crime plan with the very high level statements within the plan on a page, so that we could see the read across to be sure that it would make it easier it would be easier to see the read across between the plan on a page and the outcomes within the police and crime plan. The words in red are words that I've added in there because when I looked at the plan on a page, it didn't quite say things in the way that the Commission intended under the outcomes. So this isn't set in stone, but this is just a flavour for how we might want to consider reporting in the future.
Well, I hope that's helpful to people. And just as a general point, I've made the point before, but those who write reports, whether it's OPCC, SYP or our panels, panel chairs. I think if you can always bear in mind that you're writing a report to me, that's what it says, but actually I'm the representative of the public, you're writing a report essentially to the public, so it needs to be capable of being understood by a member of the public, and that goes to use of jargon and the kind of things that the public would be interested in, and if we can hold that in mind, I think that will improve our reports hugely. Thank you very much. Item 13, the long-awaited force performance report on Barnsley, 6.3. Roll of drums and Scott.
Commissioner, Chief Constable, colleagues, thank you. And I suppose since I'm the first one, I ought to thank my 3 district commander colleagues for allowing me the opportunity to be the first one up. I trust that everybody's read the report. My intention really is to just talk through the highlights. So at 3.1, Barnsley is the first district to return police officers to neighbourhoods, probably about 6 months ahead of the rest of the force. As a pilot district and the first one to establish a safer neighbourhood service, to embed that early intervention and demand reduction. And at 3.2 you can see the intention really is to tackle repeat locations, repeat callers, and we've made some real progress in bringing demand down across some of our key hotspots, some of our key locations. We're doing that jointly with partners. At 3.3, in addition to the neighbourhood policing teams, and whilst it is early days for the force in the use of police now officers and our first cadre of 13, the 2 that we have in Barnsley are fantastic and are making a very real difference in the teams that they're in at Goldthorpe and Kendry. Just before I move off the sort of safer neighbourhood structures, at 3.4, our intention over the next 12 months is firstly to bring on further partners into our safer neighbourhood service. So we've got some ongoing discussion with some other statutory and non-statutory partners who are not already in there, but actually have seen the benefits in terms of the demand reduction across the whole of both the public and voluntary sector, and the ability to map some of the high demand individuals and locations. So I'm hopeful that in a further update we'll be able to talk about other partners that are sat within the Safe Neighbourhood Service. And an aspiration to add some further police officers to our neighbourhood footprint. So very briefly, to establish the neighbourhood policing teams, we took some officers from our response teams. I think we're in a position now, and I'm in discussion with both political leaders and council officers about establishing an additional team, a neighbourhood policing team in Barnsley. So whilst that is still early in those discussions, I think I'm in a position to put a paper into the senior command team here to suggest taking another modest resource from our response function, because our demand can cope with it because we've reduced demand, to add an additional neighbourhood policing team into our next priority area. So it's still early days in those discussions, but I'm hopeful in this performance you will be able to do that. On page 28 in your packs, I've just pulled out some operations of note. The Deputy Chief Constable talked about burglary earlier. Operation Moscow is Barnsley's response to tackling residential burglary, centred around prevent, protect and pursue. Your colleagues will see that in April we saw an increase in burglary. That is a reflection of the new recording standards, so of both sheds and garages then being classed as residential burglaries as opposed to the old burglary dwellings. But hopefully colleagues will note the significant impact that we've had both since that initial spike, but also since the force's sharper focus on burglary dwelling. And whilst we've seen a slight increase since this data was produced in March, hopefully nowhere near the spike that we saw last April when the daylight hours changed as well. So that's a result of some significant investment, lots of problem solving, lots of joint work targeting our known offenders through our offender management team and of course our partners as well.
Is burglary semi-seasonal?
It is seasonal, and certainly one of the crime trends that we saw in Barnsley, both in August but also in the springtime, is the sneaking burglaries at a time when people might have windows open, might leave doors open, that sort of opportunist crime. I know that other parts of the county see an increasing burglary in the winter months when it's darker. For Barnsley, one of the things that we've seen is that increase in the springtime, and so it's really our plans are in place to make sure that we know which offenders that commit those type of offences are out of custody at the moment and what are our plans around each one of those. At 3.9, I just wanted to remind colleagues that this time 12 months ago saw the first deaths from carfentanil in the whole of the Yorkshire and Humber region. Those first 2 deaths were on Easter Sunday, that was in Barnsley, and whilst that had a footprint of the loss of life across all of the UK, in particular the Yorkshire and Humber region, for South Yorkshire that was focused on drug users in Barnsley. And so at the start of this year we had a significant investment of investigative resources, both in the preparation of the files for Her Majesty's Coroner, but also to disrupt the drugs market that was underpinning that. And locally, you can see there that 2 nominals were charged, notwithstanding other enforcement activity taken place by some of our national bodies that supported the overarching operation into that criminality. In terms of antisocial behaviour, at the bottom of it's a slightly different page than yours. So at 3.13, we have seen a sustained reduction in antisocial behaviour across the whole of Barnsley, both in terms of environmental and, importantly, public nuisance. Now, of course, some of that will be accounted for in the way that we record low-level violent crime slightly differently. Nevertheless, it speaks to a sustained reduction following the reintroduction of neighbourhood police officers and the reintroduction of neighbourhood policing teams. Whilst paragraph 3.15 has got lots of data within it, hopefully the graph speaks for itself in relation to our PSPO area in the town centre. October 16 saw significant reports of antisocial behaviour both in the town centre but also in and around the interchange. Shortly followed that was the reintroduction of our town centre neighbourhood team in partnership with Barnsley Council, and since that time we have seen a sustained reduction in reports of antisocial behaviour, in the nominals involved in antisocial behaviour. And I know that Mr Roberts touched on it before, but also the creative use of civil legislation. So, as an example, we got a civil injunction to ban people from a car park unless they had a lawful purpose to go there, because it was in effect a public space that was the footprint of lots and lots of antisocial behaviour. So we banned everybody there unless they're in there for a lawful reason and have conducted enforcement activity around that. And
So the reduction is a combination of the PSPO and the reintroduction of the central neighbourhood team. It's a combination of things that are making the reduction.
It's a combination of all of those things, Commissioner. And the next graph, which talks to antisocial behaviour in and around the interchange, is also a reflection of those things. But I would suggest that from the start of 2017, also the continued work to bring other partners on board. So to give a very quick example, one of the things that the PSPO allows us to do is ask people to leave that area, which includes the interchange. The security staff at the interchange will also encourage predominantly young people involved in antisocial behaviour to leave the interchange. But we need to be mindful of our responsibilities to protect vulnerable people and the geography of Barnsley. And lots of those young people can only get home in an evening from a bus in Barnsley town centre. So at the start of this year, I asked the team to do a review of our approach to it and actually work harder with partners, with youth offending teams, around targeting activity involving the young people who are involved in it. So a combination of all of those things has actually seen that same sustained reduction. The initial steps, of course, is to move people on for the reaching the PSPO, but actually what we wanted to achieve was a more sophisticated approach to it. A combination of all of those things means that the interchange in particular has just won a national award for its reductions in antisocial behaviour from the National Passenger Transport Executive. And whilst it remains...
Sorry, Scott, just on that point, just to draw attention to the graphs, a PSPO in its own right doesn't solve anything. quickly. We can see that from the graphs. What it needs, I think, as Scott said, is that focus team who deal with it with partners, and that's when we've seen the reductions. So, as I say, a PSPO isn't a magic bullet, but it's a really valuable tool if you then got the people who use it in the right way.
It's just every so often I hear councillors saying we must have a PSPO, and you think, well, yes, but it's all the rest.
And I think it doesn't touch it on here, but I could bring that back if ever required. We haven't seen since the start of this year, since we started that targeted work with young people that was subject to breaching the PSPO. We haven't seen any evidence of displacement in the areas around the town centre, which is particularly important. One of the things that I was really keen to avoid. If I could move on then to some of the community issues, the Chief Constable spoke about the community alert and the number of people signed up in the last report. Barnsley in its own right is close to 2,000 people now being signed up in relation to the community alerts, and we continue to have a really strong push on the use of it and the message that we send out to try and find the balance between really effective crime prevention advice and things that are useful where we see trends in crime, but also to raise awareness of opportunities to engage with us and some of the really positive messages. Alongside that, at 4.2, notwithstanding our support for the regular Operation Duxford operations, together with Mr Hartley, we ran an Operation Duxford focused around the Penistone area, but actually the whole of the west of Barnsley, to offer support to our rural communities. As you will see there, we visited 50 farms, discussed a number of rural crime issues with farming communities, members of rural communities, and I've signed them up to bespoke messages for crime types that actually affect our rural communities, because it's an area where I think that we continue to make progress and where we continue to keep some focus.
And if I can say so, that was very well received, and I've been to meetings in the Penistone area where people who live in remoter places, in farms or whatever, often say we never see the police, etc., etc. So I think that was a very important operation to show that you are there and you are listening and so on. So that was very good.
So notwithstanding the use of the rural community alert scheme, we will run a similar operation again. So it's not a one-off.
Good. We've got the NFU coming in, I think, this week to talk about rural crime. So that's something we can talk to them about.
That was one of the big things that when the chief was doing his sort of going around the districts, Penistone and the rural communities were very, if that perception's changed, it's that's very good.
Thank you. At 4.4, this was a point that you discussed earlier in the meeting on the agenda. Our neighbourhood profiles, I think a copy of which Mr Roberts has got with him today. Ours are jointly badged and jointly owned by South Yorkshire Police and Barnsley Council. So it's joint data, it's police data, it's Mosaic data, it's BMBC's data, and they are profiles that are owned by the two organisations, and both organisations can speak to them. From those, for each of our neighbourhood areas, we have produced a summary on a page, which is an infographic which sets out the Mosaic data and the challenges to us and partners for each of the communities, which reflects both the profiles but also the Mosaic data. That also summarises from the Mosaic data some of the best ways to engage with those communities, and from that we have then produced engagement plans for each of our communities. And those engagement plans also include what our proposed enforcement activity is to address the issues set in the profile, which we see as a cyclical 12-monthly plan to refresh the profiles each year, and then hold the individual inspectors and sergeants account for delivery against them with those underpinning engagement plans. Section 5, I've touched on engagement, and you'll see at 5.2 that Barnsley has had for a number of years a 3-tier engagement model. So notwithstanding our engagement through our presence on the streets, through our PCSOs and police officers being out in communities, we continue to have packed meetings chaired by members of the local community, with which the neighbourhood policing teams attend. If there isn't a member of the public that wants to chair it, we'll chair it, or the Barnsley Council representative will chair it. But that's where we formally set the priorities for that neighbourhood. Sitting alongside that then, we have crime and safety groups, which are always chaired by members of the public as part of the Chief Constable's roadshow when we went out to communities. Chief Constable came to a couple of them, really well attended, always chaired by volunteers, and a real opportunity for some quite detailed discussions with communities about issues affecting things down to street level, and even half a street, the side of a street, and we always put either a PCSO or council tasking officer to every one of those meetings, and that's an opportunity to really work together with communities. And then of course we've got those local groups like the Town Centre Community Group and so on. A couple of other things from me in terms of engagement. At 5.4 we have a very active neighbourhood watch scheme. I meet fairly regularly with John Hallows, our very well established and experienced neighbourhood watch coordinator for Barnsley, and we have refreshed links between all of our neighbourhood sergeants and local neighbourhood watch coordinators. At 5.5, our social media accounts have had a refresh, so both our Facebook and Twitter feeds. The reintroduction of our neighbourhood policing teams meant that the location of our teams didn't quite match our existing neighbourhood policing social media accounts. So we've done that now, so that's subject to quite a lot of messaging from us to make sure that everybody knows which community they're in, which social media channel they should be following, make sure they're getting accurate updates. And we've also now formalised a standard monthly newsletter across each area, which will again be jointly prepared by us and Barnsley Council to reflect the activity across the whole of the community safety spectrum that's taking place within those communities. And depending on our understanding of those communities based on the neighbourhood profiles, that will be sometimes left in libraries, sometimes posted to people, sometimes handed to people, sometimes online, sometimes emailed, to reflect the differing needs of those different communities.
Just before you leave that page, some of your local pact or pact type meetings are very strong in Barnsley district and have persisted over many years, and large numbers of people attending them. I went to one at Goldthorpe, I remember, very strong, and your Police Now officer was in there doing a very good job, so they are very important.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I wanted to touch on it in this report is to make sure that we South Yorkshire Police, don't ever try to shoehorn a structure that suits us over the top of it, because actually they are well established structures, and we should use that as an opportunity to fit in with it and engage with them in a manner that meets the needs of those communities and meets ours, and we've been able to do it, and it works well between us and Barnsley Council. Commissioner, the final thing that I've touched on then is just some good news stories, just for an update in relation to some of the things that are happening in Barnsley. Under Mr Hartley's sponsorship, we were the first district to establish a local Well Together board. It's chaired by Superintendent Sarah Pullman, my Ops Superintendent, and we try to use that as an opportunity firstly for our staff and officers to hold us as a command team to account for the things that we are doing to support them. So as some examples, we have, together with our Sports and Social Club, we have moved and refurbished our gymnasium. We've tried to encourage staff to use it. We have piloted the use of pulse surveys, just notwithstanding the force's broader Durham survey, just to get a general feel from our staff. We have done some things with the accommodation, so we have moved our sergeants' location to give them more space to focus on some of the detailed work that they're doing around file preparation and reviewing missing people, which is added to their well-being. And we continue to sit that meeting monthly and allow our staff to feed in things that would improve their well-being. That, together with some robust management of parts some of our HR processes. At the start of 2017, we had the highest police officer sickness in the force at 10.5%. As we sit here today, we're at 5.3%, which I think is the lowest police officer sickness in the force. And it's a continued progress, and just continue to push it. At 6.3, sitting alongside that, we've introduced a staff development programme for those that are seeking both lateral and vertical opportunities for them to broaden their knowledge. And in a week's time, when we restructure our investigative resources and we see lots of our CID officers back under our local command, we will be reintroducing a cycle rota for all of our student officers to spend time in all of the investigative teams, so protecting vulnerable people, local CID, offender management, over the first 2 years of their service, so that actually all of our most junior staff get the opportunity to experience the whole swathe of policing, for that cross-fertilisation of ideas, to bring up their experience, but also to take our responsibility as a local command team in developing our staff, because by the summer about 40% of our front line will be student officers, which is fantastic because they're enthusiastic, keen and passionate, but amongst the 40% of them are future senior investigating officers, future child abuse investigators, future district commanders, future chief constables, and our responsibility is to develop all of them, and we take that very seriously. And finally, in terms of some further developments, notwithstanding the success that we've had in the town centre, both the political leadership of the council and also the senior council officers and I would all acknowledge that we have all invested significant resources in the town centre, and that includes lots of people that wear yellow coats, so police officers, PCSOs, town management teams, the town's Kingston team, and actually we're in a position now where we've started discussions about jointly housing those teams, joint management and a much stronger joint use of assets. So from my own perspective, I don't want that to be particularly complicated. I want to put everybody together working to the same priorities, which is to make the town a really strong, vibrant, safe place for people to go to work, to live, to shop, to use the nighttime economy. And so those discussions are ongoing, but I'm really hopeful that we can have a one team approach to the town centre.
Very good, thank you very much. I must say, when I visit Barnsley Town Hall and meet councillors and the leader there, they're all very complimentary about South Yorkshire Police in their district and the approach that you're taking there, so that was good news.
To be fair as well, I think the council have been very good. Their joint approach as well, and the community of them. So I mean, that's where I think that the partnership working is really excellent. In fact, do you get the same sort of support from the council in the other districts?
Yes, I think it's true to say that we're frankly delighted with the response that we're getting from all local authority partners at the moment. We see absolutely no resistance whatsoever to the idea that coming together sensibly in terms of pursuance of problem-solving initiatives is the way forward. It's not new, of course. This is something that's been going on for some time. But actually, I think that the goodwill that's been inspired by our putting our money where our mouth is, reintroducing the neighbourhood policing footprint, demonstrates with real bodies and, frankly, lots of money in times of scarcity. Our local authority partners see that we're serious, and they are similarly committing in good spirit, and much of what will and can be achieved can only be achieved together. So no, we're delighted. We're delighted with the response we're getting, but of course, a lot of that is credit to our district commanders and those professional relationships that they establish with chief execs, leaders, so on and so forth.
Andrew.
Just one thing. I'm very interested in this report, and I particularly made a note of, so Erica has as well, of the Barnsley Well Together board, the Supporting a Positive Culture project, which you've asked me to talk about later in this meeting. I think we'll be greatly informed by what's going on in Barnsley. I may actually ask Scott for a bit more help. I'm particularly interested in the Wellbeing Pulse survey, something you can do on a regular basis, a sort of dipping in survey rather than a massive comprehensive staff survey. So this is all very positive and helpful for that project.
Yes, thank you. And we'll welcome the good news. I think we do need the good news stories as well in our from the district report. So thank you for that. Any other questions?
One, Scott, in relation to the partnership working with criminal community rehabilitation companies, just to spell it, and clinical commissioning groups, are they engaging as well in relation to the neighbourhood-based approach?
Yes. The exec director for community safety from Barnsley Council and I met last week or last 2 weeks ago with the regional director of our CRC. And whilst those discussions are ongoing, we're hopeful that we might be able to get them to come work with us, actually. So really helpful. And our CCG locally is really well engaged, both through our adult and children's safeguarding boards, regular contact with me. So yes, and we've got 2 mental health workers that already sit inside our Safe and Neighbourhood service, because actually a lot of those high demand callers from whom we've had lots of calls actually serve a broad swathe of partnership agencies, and some of the things are for us to deal with and some of the problems are ours, but actually we alone have not been able to solve some of those problems. You actually need a team of people sat around together realising that we're all talking about the same people.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and I apologise that we didn't move you up the agenda earlier, but thank you. That was item 13, assurance reports. 14 is the independent ethics panel, Andrew, and also you've got supporting a positive culture at 16. I think if you want to take them together then. And
Thank you, Alan. As always, we have picked out particular items which were discussed at the recent ethics panel. I probably don't need to talk to all of them. The paper speaks for itself. I hope it's relatively free of the jargon which you criticise, but I'm more I'm more than happy to be picked up if that isn't the case. The first issue to highlight is the use of force in custody suites. Not because this is something which is necessarily a problem in South Yorkshire, but because you asked us to look at this, having received, as indeed did the Chief Constable, a letter from the Chief Inspectors of Constabulary, I still call them that for short, and prisons, a joint letter which highlighted a number of potential problems in the use of force in custody suites. We had a look at this. There was a short paper from the force, but we didn't feel able to conclude our consideration of that, which is obviously disappointing because we'd rather not keep coming back to the same subjects. But I think that if perhaps we identify particular problems and there are specific issues on which we didn't get the information we needed, it will be, I imagine, safe to predict that we'll have resolved this by the next meeting. And I emphasise there is no reason to think that there is a particular problem in South Yorkshire's custody suites. We just need to be satisfied. We just need the evidence.
coming back next month.
Can I just make an observation on that? And we did discuss it at the meeting. Clearly, if the panel want additional information, not a problem with that if we get a specific ask. But I kind of take issue with the way it's written, because there was a specific letter from HMIC and the Prisons Inspectorate which raised 3 specific points around the governance of the use of force, external scrutiny and inconsistent training. Now those were general points made on the national position, not specific to South Yorkshire. The report that we submitted, I would say, dealt with each of those points in good detail. We have very strong governance around use of force. As a force, we were one of the ones who kept on recording use of force data when others didn't. There is a system in place that ensures those are recorded. There's a whole process, and ultimately it sits under Tim, who chairs a use of force panel. So in terms of that query, I think that was dealt with. In terms of the scrutiny, we've got very healthy and rigorous processes with the custody visitors scheme, so we certainly don't have that issue, and our custody facilities have recording. And in terms of personal training, which was another criticism levied on a national level, again, we have all our staff are trained, it's managed, it's done on an annual basis. In particular relation to spit guards, we have processes around that. In terms of parva spray, we have that. And one of the points that was mentioned in this specifically was around the risk of positional asphyxia when people are laid in a prone position in a restraint. That is dealt with in our training. So in terms of the letter and the questions it posed, my submission was that we dealt with thoroughly each of those. If there are supplementary issues on the subject of custody, then of course we're more than willing to supply that information.
I don't think we're going to resolve this here, whatever this is, to be resolved. But you've asked for more information or something.
We will formulate in precise terms the questions which were felt not to have been dealt with. Mark and I did have a difference of view at the meeting, which seems to have carried through to this meeting, which I was trying to avoid. But we will ask those questions, and I hope, as I said, by the time that we next meet, we will have been able to satisfy you, Commissioner, of the questions that you were asking us to establish, to get the answers to.
Well,
so shall we move on?
As I say, we're not going to resolve whatever it is here, but I hear the pushback in a sense. Well, I hear two pushbacks, and we'll have something hopefully by the next meeting that satisfies us all. I would thought.
Thank you.
Well, there shouldn't be any reason why we. Oh,
I'm not anticipating any difficulty.
thank you very much.
The second matter to draw to your attention, and this comes elsewhere in papers for this board, both today and elsewhere, the use of stop and search. As members of this board will know, there has been some concern nationally about the reduction in numbers of stop and search. The proportion of positive outcomes in South Yorkshire, i.e. something is found and someone is arrested, is around 1 in 4, which is similar to the previous period. We were dealing with a 6-month period. That is against a serious drop in the number of stops and search over recent years. The panel has already supported the project in South Yorkshire, which is known as See No Suspect, to encourage the officers to have confidence. And I think, Chief, that is the subject of your recent video blog, as I understand. We were very pleased to hear about that. There were one or two insights into the statistics which were certainly new to me. One of them, I think, Commissioner, you mentioned at a previous meeting, in relation to searches among the black and minority ethnic population. You had, I think, been approached by members of that community to encourage the force to have more confidence in stopping and searching. And, of course, such citizens are disproportionately represented among victims of violent crime, so that's well understood. What I hadn't appreciated, of course, is that if you break down the age demographics of stops and searches, I'm not sure whether it's stop and searches or stops and search or whatever, but anyway, it is likely in relation to those statistics that there will be a predominance of younger people being stopped and searched, and it is they, of course, who are most likely to carry knives and indeed to be the victims of for example, knife-related crime. So I think we haven't done that research. We're just assuming that if that research were done, the statistics would not appear as disproportionate in relation to BAME searches as they may appear. The only other thing I have
my own views about this and the methodology around it, as you know. I mean, if you're stopping and searching within one part of the city where there's a predominance of ethnic minorities present, and then comparing that with statistics, population as a whole, you're going to get that distortion. You've just built it into your methodology. So I don't know why we keep beating ourselves up over this. I mean, if you want to change your figures, you just go and stop and search in another part of the city and add those to the mix, and I don't see where that gets us.
No,
I think the methodology is just flawed. But you're right. Yes, I have had mothers in Burngree, in particular in Sheffield, approach me and say that they do welcome the police as long as it's proportionate, as long as it's fair. Then they totally understand it, and they don't want their children harmed with knives. And interestingly, in an aside at the round table I had with the Home Secretary, Cressida Dick came across and said, because I'd mentioned this there, she said exactly the same in London. They'd had people from those ethnic minorities, women, mothers, come to the Met saying the same thing. So why we can't say a bit of this more publicly, I do not know.
Well, I don't see why, if you may not remember, but in our last annual report, the Ethics Panel's last annual report, we did draw attention to the disproportionate number of BAME searches. This year, I think with the greater understanding, we can say something of what I've been saying and reflect what you say, and I imagine that would be welcome to the force as well.
I mean, there'll be the critics, because there will be the critics.
The only other thing shall I just pursue?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes,
yeah.
sure.
The only other thing I need to talk about in this context, I think, was our first look at the current statistics of workforce representation. They're listed there in bullet points. What is striking is the amount of turnover in both officers and staff. But although that's often seen as unhealthy, it's also, I think, can be seen as an opportunity for a refreshment of culture. So the ethics panel were not in the least bit concerned to see those figures. A further breakdown will be needed before we can give us the assurance you've asked us for, because we look after, to some extent, your statutory responsibilities in relation to equality and diversity, Alan. A further breakdown will be necessary before we can satisfy, I think, the questions which arise in that. But we've had a first go at it at the bottom of page 34.
Just a couple of things. Special constables, I don't know whether, Chief, you know the answer to that. We lost 109 special constables.
Yes.
That reads rather strangely. I'm not sure whether this is happenstance. It sounds like carelessness.
Yes.
Or whether there's a reason for this.
Yeah.
Or is it?
I think. ACC hardly can speak to the detail of this, but suffice to say there is an element of working through who amongst the cohort are actually available for duty and are being fully deployed. I think we had a higher number, which of course we're very pleased of, but frankly many within that cohort were never turning up, were not productive, and basically was a waste of the public money in trying to sustain it. So this is trying to get to the core, the productive core. But there is no complacency about the idea that we're just going to see this number drift away. We've broken it back to its productive core with a view to sort of building on the strength of what we're about, and that's very much where we're headed with this. I think,
as the Chief says, and Dave can do the detail, there was certainly a large element, where we needed to work out those who were productive and engaged, but equally an awful lot of special constables joined the regulars.
Yes, that's right.
So there's a massive abstraction. So they're not lost to us, and in some ways it's healthy that they come and see us, they like us, they join us, but there is a significant...
And it's a recognised route into the force.
Yes.
Just a snapshot, if I may, from this morning. We had a formal parade this morning where I inspected 3 intakes at the same time. I spoke to every officer as a formal parade, and for many of them, asked them the background. I'd say about 1 in 3, 1 in 4 declared that they had been a special constable, were familiar with the force. So there's an awful lot, have progressed on to become regulars. Absolutely focused on those who are productive and not looking for a full-time career with South Yorkshire Police, but actually it is a vocation that they're going to commit to. And our ambition now, we have established a number of recruiting courses now in the coming 12 months. So our ambition is to build a number of special constables. For those, yes, accepting some will come into the organisation as a regular, but actually our key focus is for those who want to be a special constable, for a significant period of time and commit to their local communities. So we're in an improving picture now.
I realise that one statistic that isn't in here, but which we were given, was the number of volunteers. I'm not quite clear what the status of volunteer is, but I believe there's been an increase in the number of volunteer assistance to the police. Dave will probably tell me what a volunteer is, and I haven't put that in here, so that was an omission.
We have a whole range of volunteers, and we're well represented in terms of volunteers that support across a whole range of functions. Neil Thomas, Superintendent of Doncaster, coordinates that, and if you'd like the detail of that, I can get a full report, giving a snapshot of where we are.
Sounds as if Andrew does. I meet volunteers at things like the Rotherham show. I come across volunteers there. But in all sorts of contexts. I do occasionally come across volunteers who say they'd like to do more, and why they're slow in saying that, coming forward, I don't know, but that may be something that might be worth having a look at sometime. But,
one other matter which arose at the meeting, one of our number had recently been the guest of a neighbourhood policing team, as colleagues will know. Two of members of the panel have been conducting interviews with different ranks. They're at inspector at the moment, which is referred to in taking the ethical temperature. As a result of that, the opportunity arose for to spend a morning with the neighbourhood policing team in Moss Way. It's a very interesting report, which I won't read in full, but I think there's one paragraph which I found very, very encouraging, and quite interestingly, and I think the same thing happened, Alan, when you went out on patrol. There was an impromptu car chase in the middle of the day, in the middle of the visit of the neighbourhood policing team, which of course pleases any boy racer, and this was an unexpected benefit. He didn't actually go for a car chase, but he got a car chase. Anyway, the paragraph is, the chance to observe the team at work also offered an insight into how these officers carry out their duties. From what I heard and saw, it is apparent that the motivation to serve the public is very high, and the ethos of public service is secure with these officers. They're committed to building mutual trust, respect and confidence with the communities they serve. They understand the needs of vulnerable people, seem at ease with their role, which they feel enables them to develop meaningful relationships with local communities. They appeared to me to be articulate and reflective. They take their work seriously and were well led. I was impressed by many aspects of what I observed.
Well, thank you. Yes, I read some of these reports, and I wondered if there's a way in which we can introduce, they may have to be redacted a little bit, into PABs, because I think they do give an insight into things by a member of the public, essentially, who's gone and observed.
Yeah.
So you might want to have a think about it.
Yeah.
Michael Lewis was the last one I read. It's really very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. You asked me to deal with very briefly. I think this will be with the Positive Culture Project. You'll remember that both you and the chief asked for the panel to be involved jointly with members of the force in support for a positive culture within the force. This has now been going for a few months. We started off by looking at the Durham staff survey and the action plan, which the force had to meet the points which were raised in the survey. On the face of it, the action plan addresses the issues identified in the survey. What we've not been able to do is to get behind the survey. The survey is commercially confidential. It's owned by the University of Durham. I'm not sure we're going to get much further with a breakdown of what the survey either asked or had to or found. But our initial impression was reassuring. The action plan has sought to address the issues identified in the survey. Second theme is the one you've actually just been referring to, the reports arising from interviews conducted by two members of the panel with different levels of officer and indeed with recruits over the past 18 months. All very interesting stuff, and which is feeding in to the Culture Project. It's inevitably anecdotal, it's qualitative rather than quantitative research, but has advanced our understanding considerably. As to where we go now, we do need to move towards a timetable for conclusion and reporting. At our last meeting, we focused on 3 themes. Communication, i.e. how does the force communicate internally with itself? Secondly, well-being, both organisational and individual. You'll have heard me pick up the point in the Barnsley report by Scott Green. Very interesting stuff there. There's a lot of material about well-being of police forces in the literature. And thirdly, lesson learning. Is this a force which learns lessons? I think that was a point, Alan, you drew attention to at the very first when we were asked to do this project. What we're likely to do is to test some recent activity of the force against those 3 themes of communication, well-being and lesson learning. We haven't decided exactly what those will be, but some suggestions have been made. For example, communication of the force crime review, the renaming of the SLG again to senior command team, and thirdly, another suggestion made was testing whether individuals have a clear understanding of their expectations of their role and whether how those fit in to the direction of travel of the force. So that's where we are at the moment. We are dependent, of course, on support from the office. I understand that Kevin is going to be giving us some time to support Erica, which is very welcome. We're also dependent on force contributions. Simon Mellors actually has been a great support recently, while Shelley Hemsley has been busy on other things. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good. Chief, you've got to go.
I'm afraid I have to go. Our fair county is just about to welcome His Royal Highness, the Duke of York, who's visiting Sheffield Cathedral, amongst other places. So I'm going to go and say hello and set him on his way.
Give him our best wishes.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. Any questions or comments? Thank you. Shall we move then to JIAC, which is by exception, Melvin?
Thank you, Alan. We last met on the 20th of March 2018, and you'll see at the top of page 38 there was quite a number of reports that we actually went through, but we were still able to give an overall assurance level of 3 to the PCC. Just a few things to draw out. We welcome the attendance of ACC Forber at the meeting, deputising for the DEP, and it is good to see the force sort of continuing to send a member of the senior command team to JIAC. And he was able to update us on the force's GDPR arrangements, outlining actions being taken.
Are you assured?
Well, I was going to say, we're led to believe that the Information Commissioner is not sort of expecting everybody to be compliant by the May deadline.
Are you assured enough?
But I think it would be useful to us to have a further assurance report at our June meeting to identify any gaps that might still be.
I mean, I think Melvin raises a good point, because the date for the Act isn't actually in. I had a meeting yesterday and went through the various matrix and risks to assess where we are. Right. But part of the problem we've got is that until the Act's passed, we don't have national guidance from the MPCC or the College of Policing. So we're extrapolating forward what we can from existing practice, but we're identifying on a regular basis potential risks and putting mitigating actions in place, but we've not had the final version yet of what it's going to be. But as has been said, the feedback from the Information Commissioner is that there's an understanding of the current operating environment for us, and that will be framing their actions as to go forward in the short term.
I think it's something that we need to keep an eye on and keep having a sort of follow-up report, either through the risk register or separately. We congratulated the force on achieving good for effectiveness in the latest field inspection. We commented that the information on the PCC website is not always up to date, and also asked for a progress update on the member portal and when this would be available.
The OPCC understand what?
I assume we'll get some sort of feedback on that at some stage. There's some concern around the timeliness of reports. I think possibly a problem at this particular meeting was that there were quite a few new reports as part of the year-end process and the holding to account arrangements. But I found generally that the idea of the chair's brief is the opportunity for reports to be presented, and quite often there are very few. And then we tend not to get the full pack until a few days before the meeting, instead of a week before. And I think that's partly because we're not getting the reports early enough for the chair's brief, so that's something for everybody to take on board, really, both the force and the OPCC. We thought it would be useful for members to understand the use of goal groups within the force and ones that are current, and similarly an understanding of the names of current operations in use. I've picked up 3 today, I think, that I've not heard of before. Operation Moscow, Operation Signature, Operation President. There's lots of these things, and I'm not sure whether we need to know, but quite often it's, you know.
I'd suggest not.
Right, okay.
Goal groups, certainly we can do your list of.
Yeah.
Goal groups are normally chaired by a chief officer or a district commander,
Right.
and will be those operational or organisational issues that present significant risks. So you'd expect the level of scrutiny to be at that level.
Yeah.
I'll speak to Alan and we'll get you a list of the current goal groups. In terms of operation names, I think it would be meaningless.
Yeah.
to
Well, I
give you-
think yeah,
there are that
some
many.
that keep featuring, and we need to know
Yeah.
those. But
I think as long as there's the sort of definition of which it is at
I mean,
a
I think
particular meeting.
there's certain force operations which are branded. So Operation Signature is around economic crime and financial crime.
Right.
So I think that'll be an ongoing theme that
Yeah.
we've branded in a particular way. But Operation Moscow is Barnsley's burglary plan.
So how many of the themed ones are there? Would that be useful to know those at least?
We can have a check.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think it's just to
you
try
need
and
to have a.
Yeah.
you need
just
to
to
have
try
a
and
chat.
We'll get you
Understand it.
the relevant information, but if we just gave you a list of...
I think we ought to have an annual prize for most ridiculous and absurd name that the force managed to get
Do you
hold of.
know, it's often trickier than you think, because they just come off lists, so they're random.
Yes.
But you do need to Google and Wikipedia, other search things are available.
We've had dolphin and crocodile within the last 4
Yeah,
days.
sometimes you get some names that are generated randomly but could have unfortunate connotations. I won't tell you what the original name for the support to Russia in the World Cup was, but it was changed.
Okay.
I'll whisper it to you later.
Thank you very much.
I mean, the trees operation is Operation Quito, which is the capital of Ecuador. Right? The connection between Ecuador and trees is beyond me, but
Well, it's
random.
There is deliberately not a connection, because if you have a connection, someone will assume you're trying to give a message, so they come off a random list.
Whoever can work out a connection to that one. Melvin, we interrupted you,
Yeah,
but you're probably finished.
No, I'm only on to 6 now. We're looking forward to linking in with the work of the new planning and efficiency group in managing the delivery of savings plans for 2018-19, as well as understanding the capacity for delivery. We're still waiting for the SLA for the internal audit service, which seems to be dragging on a little bit, so hopefully we'll see that at some stage. We expressed frustration that long-standing internal audit recommendations were being closed as a result of challenge at the meeting, rather than being closed prior to the meeting, after consultation between internal audit and force staff. I mean, this is an area that we've been focusing on, and it's quite surprising that some of these things, there is now an agreement that they can drop off, but they're not dropped off before the meeting, and it was only after we chatted about it that they did drop off. And finally, we'd like to congratulate the force on the number of new annual reports that was brought to the committee as part of the holding to account and year-end process. This provided assurance to the PCC and Chief Constable the policies and processes are in place and being adhered to. There were quite a number of new reports, which, again, as I said, I think the reason for some of the delay was that, you know, the first time you do these things, you've got to establish exactly what you want in them. So.
Okay,
that's it.
so I can be reassured to level 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was whatever it was. 15.
14. Oh, 15.
Leapfrog 16 to 17 then. Independent custody visitors, Sally.
Yep. Thank you, Chair. I'll just run through really some of the key exceptions that have been raised. We've had a few problems with the Connect IT system purely because they're no longer able to produce the ICVs when they visit a list of the detainees in the cell at that particular time. The ICVs they're more concerned that the amount of custody staff time it's wasting because they're having to produce them a list sometimes by handwriting, so it's eating into their time, and it's also a bit of, you know, they are concerned about the custody staff as well, really. So that's something I am liaising with the sergeant in the Connect team on that, to see if we can try and get that resolved. The other...
Did you want to comment?
No, that's fine. It's,
Okay.
if you flag the issue and we'll work through it.
A long-standing issue is around Doncaster Custody Suite. It's coming up every time we have a meeting that the custody suite's quite old. It isn't really very compliant with a lot of the legislation and things like that, and we know it's on the Forced Strategic Risk Register, but it is quite a concern really, because it's concerning for the staff as well as detainees.
Nice.
Is there anything in the capital programme that addresses this?
Not yet.
Well, it's not yet. I mean, that means no.
Yes, sorry. I think it's worth reminding ourselves where we are with this. First of all, the risks are being mitigated by the custody department. However, we cannot make a significant improvement without a new build. Following Shepcote and Barnsley being rebuilt, under the SCAPE contract we used to rebuild those, the constructor, Wilmot Dixon, was allowed to actually provide us with a feasibility study for a similar facility. We had a feasibility study undertaken, and the cost of building a new custody suite and moving the police headquarters was approximately in the range 20 to 25 million, plus land purchase, less capital received. At the time, the conversations which senior command team had, and also with your chief finance officer, that would add approximately £2 million per year to the revenue costs. And until we've got over the hump of legacy, because we couldn't afford that.
So that's replacing College Road Police Station as well. It's the whole.
For custody alone, you'd be talking approximately 15 million to actually replace it. It's a very large sum of money. That was the debate we had at that time, but it will be one of Louise's priorities to actually look at when she starts. I think this commission is one of the areas where the only funding we get for capital is a small capital grant and borrowing approval, which roughly pays for us to replace our vehicles each year. Because of legacy, the reserves we have, which we would like to use to actually do transformational things like putting it to one side for a custody suite, this is where we suffer because our only choice is borrowing, and whilst interest rates are low at this moment in time, when you're talking at such a large build cost, it is still a significant sum.
This has never been in the capital programme then, within living memory. Because it's really quite serious. I mean, it's not a pleasant place to have to work, and never mind do the difficult things that have to be done there. And I don't know how you mitigate against flooding, rain pouring down walls in heavy rain, etc., etc. That's really asking a lot.
Yeah, I think now we've got a settled medium-term resourcing strategy. We now need to start planning it in 2 to 3 years. And at the same time, we've also got competing demands from Rotherham through their one place working, wanting us to relocate Rotherham Police Station, which again is unaffordable at this moment in time.
We work together with the force to understand how it's articulated in the strategic risk register, what the mitigations are, cost of those mitigations, and then the long-term plan, how it's going to be put in the capital programme, and whether compliance can be achieved, notwithstanding that the capital programme doesn't provide for it yet by the list of mitigations. But I think there needs to be some assurance around compliance issues and risk issues before something.
Yeah, I think Tim can provide a lot of that. 'Cause it's
We'll leave that there.
The next point was in relation to the Independent Custody Visiting Association. For quite a few years really, we've not got a right lot from the society, from the organisation really, but they've got 2 new members of staff and they are very, very good now, and they're producing stuff quicker than what we can actually keep pace with them on a lot of the time, but they've developed a lot of training and a lot of packages that we can deliver to our custody staff, to our ICVs, which is really, really positive. They've also developed a quality assurance framework which they want in schemes to work towards, which is something that we're quite keen to do and look at, because it actually gives us for the first time a checklist around what the scheme should involve. So that's a really positive thing and something we'll be definitely moving towards next year. And we are doing a review of the animal welfare scheme at the moment, and hoping to bring that back up to speed. That's it really. Yeah, future work. Yeah.
Anybody want to comment or observe anything? Question? Okay, thank you very much. Finally, trust and confidence. Well, not quite finally, but trust and confidence steering group. Fiona, do you want to just do some headline stuff?
Yeah, we've got attached in here the baseline assessment results, full narrative report. You remember earlier in the year we brought back the headlines and some slides and the key findings from that report. The lengthy report that you've got at the back now puts the narrative around that for you, and I don't intend to go through that in any great detail because it is there in detail for you to read through. But just picking out a couple of the headlines from there. The company that did this for us, independent company, SMSR Limited, very experienced company in working with public consultations. In their view, this was one of the largest surveys of its kind, targeting specifically around hard-to-reach groups. They managed to speak to about 1,100 people in each of the districts, so 4,400 overall over a 7-week period. They're targeting mainly sort of the harder-to-reach groups, so the young people, which are classified as under 35, BME communities, multiple deprivation areas, areas of high unemployment, and the legacy issues. Within those results, which I've sort of picked out some of the bullet points, some very, very positive feedback, especially around levels of trust and confidence and from certain members of the community within there. Lots of people feeling that they're well informed, they're pleased with the uniformed police presence in their area, and that the South Yorkshire Police understand their issues. In particular, one of those bullet points, about the 7th one down, 63% of people feel South Yorkshire Police understand their issues compared to 61% nationally. So in some of these areas, South Yorkshire Police was coming out higher than the national, as reported in the British Crime Survey for England and Wales. Lots of empathy from members of the public around the cuts and the challenges that are facing the force today. Levels of trust in South Yorkshire Police were actually higher than the national figure as well. People feel that we deal with complaints very well, and they're confident that they're receiving a good service. So some really good figures in there. Some of the areas to look at for improvement was around victims. There was an issue around where some people have been a victim of crime. They seem to be a little bit less confident in some areas. So the OPCC and some support from the force as well were looking at a project that sort of drills down into there and see what part of the victim journey it is that particularly affects their trust and confidence, and we'll report back on that later in the year. As follow on from this, we're going to do some work with the districts. So over the next week, SMSR and the districts commanders and some of their members of the teams are meeting to look at taking down the specifics on this report into each district and break it down, and that will help to feed their neighbourhood plans and the confidence plans going forward. And what this report is now fully in the public domain. It'll go on the website. I'll speak to corporate comms as well about making sure that it's highly visible on the internet, the intranet for the force as well, so that staff have got full access to it.
Thank you. David, did you want to add anything?
I just think those headlines really, that particularly from the survey, that the seldom heard results compare extremely favourably with our broader Your Voice Count survey. And when we went into this, I think the anticipation was that because we were going to harder to reach and seldom heard groups, that would perhaps get some feedback that showed some gaps. So I'm really encouraged by the service that we're offering towards those seldom heard groups, because within our neighbourhood footprint that is still relatively fresh in place, we have prioritised. We've looked at those who are most vulnerable, we've looked at our communities with the greatest need, and I think the reflection here is really from some of that early work about making sure that we do prioritise our intervention at neighbourhood level. It's not all positive. We see the areas there around Doncaster facing some difficulties, lack of follow-up in terms of information. This reaffirms some of the areas that we're already aware of, and we've got work in train to begin remedying some of this. So, all told, I think this was a really useful piece of work, and really does inform the Your Voice counts as we move forward.
Just to add on to that, I think looking at sort of Your Voice counts going forward, and we'd really like to capture some more of these, the harder to reach voices within the Your Voice Count survey. And I know Phil's looking at some ways of actually how we do that going forward.
And that would include the disabled, because I think that was an area that we were anxious about.
This is a more difficult area to target, but we are looking at some sort of ways we can do that, whether involve them in some of the independent advisory groups or...
Some of these groups are relatively small in number, but it impacts on them hugely. I was at the Doncaster School of the Deaf, or for the Deaf, which I didn't realise was the size it is, 24 acres of it, absolutely enormous, and a nursery up to 19 years of age, I think, something like that, all hard of hearing or profoundly deaf. And there it is in Doncaster, and they're bringing people not only from South Yorkshire, Doncaster, but from across the country, and indeed internationally. There's a residential facility there as well. It's things like that that are really quite extraordinary. But yes, I think you've now got a huge body of information and evidence here which we can build on, and every part of it raises further questions, which is the nature of these things.
On that point, could I just ask how often it's intended to conduct this? This is a baseline, isn't it? When is it next going to be done, or is it not?
I'm not sure yet. We need to have those discussions as a result of this and see how it pans out. But I think a lot of the questions that we use, I think we use some of the basis from Your Voice Counts. So there's some similar, also not exactly replicated the questions within Your Voice Counts in here. There might be some way of mapping between the two surveys. So it's whether we can integrate and sort of improve Your Voice Counts to be able to include some of these wider voices. And if not, then we might look at repeating it in a couple of years. But I think
the natural time would be towards the end of Alan's current term of office. And looking back in terms of trust and confidence in policing and crime services in South Yorkshire having been a priority of Alan's, by then the neighbourhood model would have embedded. There'll be some post-implementation review, experience, learning and actions on the back of that that's come out of the strategic change programme.
Good idea.
I mean, we know the reasons why we did it. Ideally, I think I would have liked to have seen it earlier, so they were capturing something that was at a moment in time a bit before this. But we are where we are, and it's given us now that baseline set of figures. Yeah. But they are fascinating. Okay, thank you very much, Fiona.
So just nip on the independent advisory groups, looking at the strategic IAG for minority communities. We're just setting a date for the meeting next month now, and we'll be electing a new chair, so I'll report back on that at the next report, and then I think the rest of them are over to David.
Commissioner Community Alerts that we've spoken about a number of times, as you'll see, the latest iteration is that we're 8,000, so the report written only a matter of a few days ago was 5,000. The Chief, have got in mind 7,000. No doubt by the end of this meeting we'll probably be pushing 9,000. And much of that flows from, over the page, neighbourhood policing is embedded now. We've got the structure, we've got the settled resourcing model there that's beginning to deliver for us. I'll not go through the full detail of the 12-week delivery plan, but this is an approach I've taken to, within 3 months, getting of all the essential items that in its broadest sense, the engagement, communication and links with our communities, that we get that done to a high level consistency right across the force. So the deadline for this is towards the end of May, and you can see the bullet points there are all the elements that I expect to be seen. And the reason for this is we are naturally in an industry of distraction, that because we have to deal with day-to-day spontaneous challenge, we have the best intentions organisationally sometimes to get things done, but we can see a fragmented approach and perhaps we don't achieve all that we would do. The ambition with the 12-week delivery plan is prioritising everything around our neighbourhoods and making sure that everything from our baseline engagement, how many drop-ins, how many pack meetings we have, our directed visibility, the plan on a page being used at neighbourhood level so we can see those profiles, neighbourhood watch, the use of alerts, minimum standards around social media are all standardised, embedded and delivered. And really when we go on to point E, the Trust and Confidence Improvement Plan really follows the delivery plan. The delivery plan is to say let's have it done by June, and then we monitor that going forward by the ongoing Trust and Confidence Improvement Plan. So I have to say I am really optimistic and really quite excited about the prospect here. The one thing we have to accept, because this is based upon perceptions rather than delivery of an immediate tangible, because we are surveying, with Your Voice Counts there is a natural almost 2-quarter lag before we take some action here and now today. The community feel that difference, they experience the difference, we then run a survey, we make sense of the survey, so by the time the information arrives here, the action we're taking today we probably won't feel in terms of results until Q3 of this year. But simply by the scale of the activity taking place across the districts, and I think listening to Scott across at Barnsley gives a feel for that. There is enormous activity, and I'm really quite excited about the prospects for us moving from where we are at the foot of the table around trust and confidence to quickly moving up in terms of our position nationally.
Good. Yeah, I mean there is a lot of activity there. Absolutely right.
Outside of that, Commissioner, we spoke around stop and search. That's really around just encouraging, that legitimate use of stop and search back to a proportionate level that will keep our community safe. Outside of that, as I say, wealth of activity and trust and confidence, and really by June we'll be able to see consistently across the force that embedded.
Thank you very much. I don't think I've got any other questions or comments on this report. Anybody else? Michelle? Thank you very much, both. Almost at the end. PCC decisions, Michelle, 1, 2, 3, 2, 4.
Yeah, it's just one decision to report since the last meeting, which is in relation to financial assistance. That's for officers involved in proceedings. There have to be inquest proceedings in this respect. It's been reported to the panel as well, and I know there was a question from Mr Carter at the panel in relation to the cap. That's as a result of me working with the firms on what work was required to support the officer and then injecting a bit of realism and pragmatism over it and coming to an agreement with the firm in relation to what was a realistic figure that was also affordable within the budget constraints that South Yorkshire Police has. So that's that only decision there to record.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other business? I think just one last thing before we close. I'm very pleased to see Wendy Zealand here today as a member of the public. Previously she's been here as Neighbourhood Watch. She's not Neighbourhood.
Still here as Neighbourhood Watch.
Okay. Well, I was going to say we wanted to thank you for all your contributions you made on behalf of Neighbourhood Watch, but we're also pleased to see you here as a member of the public. So thank you very much. I think that's everything, everybody. Thank you very much.